I want to welcome everyone to our third panel, or intermediary panel, of our conference on Indo-Iranian and Sino-Iranian intersections. This panel is very close, I think, the topic is very close to my heart because, when was it, Laura? 2002? We organized our first Silk Road conference in conjunction with the Silk Road Ensemble's concert headed by Yo-Yo Ma. And if some of you may have been present, but Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Ensemble musicians came out to give a lecture demonstration in Hertz Hall, and it was just a wonderful start to this very interesting collaboration. So what we tried to do was to organize a panel that would give you some background or insight into the pieces that will be performed tonight. The title of the performance is Heroes Take Their Stands. So we invited three scholars to talk a little bit about, for those who are actually going to attend the conference, you are about to experience. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first scholar, Professor Ahmed Sudbury. He's the Gorder Professor of Islamic World Studies and Professor of Sociology at Lake Forest College. His specialization is the sociology of intellectuals, the sociology of religions, and he's very interested in Iran and the Middle East. He's interested in topics such as reform in Islam, reform in Iran. He's received a number of awards. The American Center for Oriental Research postdoctoral fellowship in Amman, Jordan in the late 1990s. He's had the Byrd Award for intellectual contributions to the campus at Lake Forest College. Most importantly, in the context of what we're trying to do here, Professor Sadri is the co-creator of the Heroes Take Their Stands program. So we wanted to invite him to talk a little bit about the idea behind the performance, and perhaps an overview of some of the pieces that we will be listening to. And then we'll have two scholars, Duncan MacRae and Soroor Ghanimati, talk more in depth about the specific pieces, in particular the piece on Siavosh in Turan, and also the piece on Electra, the Greek heroine. So please help me welcome, before I just go on and on, please help me welcome Professor Sadri to the podium.
Thank you, Tang Center for Silk Road Studies and Berkeley for inviting me to share with you some of the ideas that undergird this show. This is the penultimate, tonight is the penultimate show. The next one will be in Washington, D.C., the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, and this will be the end of this tour. I hope many of you will be able to go to the event tonight, and it will start with this statement. And I confess the words are mine. And for somebody who doesn't believe in words, you'll be surprised how I'll be able to fill my entire time with words. This is a project that kind of evolved because I have really been immersed in the works of my mentor in sociology, not immediate mentor, but intellectual mentor, Max Weber. And I always thought that it really, in many occasions, Max Weber comes very close and even touches on areas of life that cannot be explored rationally, basically with mystery. And so one of the areas in which I really feel that we are, even in the academic world, even when we are studying the kind of papers that have been presented in this seminar, sometimes become very close to mystery. We as academics, using logic, using scientific methods, and Max Weber believes that social sciences are sciences. It's a big discussion that he has, and I am very much in agreement, and I even waxed lyrical about how scientific these disciplines are. But in these disciplines sometimes become very close to mystery, sometimes we can even touch mystery. And in those occasions, we have to withdraw. And this is the experience of encountering the sublime. We in academics, we deal with problems that can be solved rationally. But when we come in contact with mystery, it looks like that we cannot demystify it. We should not demystify it. And basically, when we are encountering mystery, what we have to do is to marinate in its grandeur. And one of the areas in which this happens is when we are in presence of heroic action. When heroes take a stand, I think we are really at that level where we can't go any further. We have to withdraw and do something else. If we want to contemplate the heroic moment, the moment when a hero takes a stand, we really have to take wing on the arts, fly above the artistic moment, and contemplate the heroic action with the wings of music and art. My heroes are not superheroes. A couple of days ago, I watched this new Avengers heroes. Big Bang movies. I actually watched it on one of those big screens. I can't tell you about the plot of it, but because I don't remember a single thing about the plot, with lots of explosions. But these are heroes who kick ass. These are heroes who have superpowers. None of these heroes, none of our real heroes are like that. They have messed up lives. They encounter the kinds of dilemmas that we encounter in our lives. Sometimes they encounter dilemmas that are hard because the choice is between selfishness and the selfless choice. God knows that is difficult enough. Beauty over duty. How many of us, we all know, and I'm in agreement with Kant here, we all know what the right choice is in our own choices that we have made in our own lives. We all know what the right choice is. How often do we make the right choice? And when we think about it over the long run, we end up in despair because human beings don't make the right choice often enough. And this is why Kant ends up with suggesting that we postulate a God. It is hard enough to make the selfless choice, but it is not intellectually hard. Intellectually, it is very clear to all of us. We may have some excuses, we may want to kind of obfuscate, but we all know what the right choice is. In our lives, we know that when we made the right choice and when we made the selfish choice. But the problem doesn't end there. The problem is that sometimes the choice is not between right and wrong, but two rights. And this is really complicated. This is the ineradicable conflict that Weber talks about in his essay on religious directions of the world and their directions. He talks about how all the different spheres of life are constantly in conflict with each other. And this is why the best way of encountering this world is polytheism. Each should follow their own demons. And that is the best way of going about life, because the world cannot be captured in one single net of meaningfulness. Everybody fails. Philosophers fail. People who come up with theodicies fail. And basically that is the problem. The heroes that we encounter in this presentation, some of them are facing the choice between good and evil. And they are heroes because they take their stand against selfishness. But sometimes it is more messed up than that. Sometimes it is the choice between two goods. So I took the idea to the Silk Road Project as an academic. I don't know anything about music. I am kind of musical. I appreciate music. I'm not tone deaf. But these people can really do the work. And unfortunately, Yo-Yo Ma loved the idea, and they went with it. And we ended up commissioning 5 pieces to 5 musicians to create music. And my idea was not only music, but also multimedia. So it is up to the composer how to include the non-musical element. And this is a wonderful ensemble that I've been traveling with. And the first piece, we ended up commissioning it to a citizen of Peru who is from Japanese extraction, Pauchi, and her sister did this wonderful abstract videos that go in the background. And you just wait until you come across this scene. The picture really doesn't capture the three-dimensional aspect of this. The haunting music of Electra that we are going to hear Duncan talk about. Electra is caught between 2 maxims, between a rock and a hard place. Whatever she does, she loses. So does her brother. Avenge your father. You have to avenge your father. You should do it. Honor says you should do it, but you have to kill your mother. And if you kill your mother, you are going to be beset by these hags from underground, and they are going to drive you crazy. And this is the mad moment that is so beautifully captured by Pauchi and her sister Naomi, who did the animations. Then we go to China. Actually, I wanted to go from west to east. I wanted to go from Greece to Iran to India to China and back to the United States. But it didn't work out that way. So musically, they have kind of, I defer to their choice. They went in this way. And I think you will know why when you see the show. So we go to China, the story of a child bride, Doi. I know that's how it's pronounced, and so but that is how I can read it out the way it's written. And it's a child bride who goes through a very, very hard time. At the age of 7, she's given in to marriage, and then she ends up losing her husband, living with her mother-in-law, and then there are some thugs who are trying to exploit them, but she sticks with the filial piety. She sticks with the family, her adoptive family, and eventually the bad guys win, and she is executed. But at the moment of execution, she basically says, if you kill me, there is going to be snow in the middle of summer. The heavens will rebel against this. This is portrayed in Chinese opera, and some Chinese were telling me, well, Due is not seen as a heroine, but neither is Electra. I mean, these are not really like Hercules type of heroes. These are exactly the kind of heroes that will bring us face to face with the mystery of living as a human being, being torn between these terrible choices. This reminds me of another recent expression of this, an Iranian movie that won the Oscar for the best foreign film, Separation. And I don't know whether some of you have seen it. If not, it's a really good movie to see. It's a story of a man who is dedicated to his father, who is experiencing advanced stages of Alzheimer's disease, doesn't recognize him. And his wife says, why do you dedicate yourself to him? He even doesn't recognize you. And he says, because I recognize him. I know who he is. He doesn't know who I am. Admirable, no? This guy dedicates his life to his father, who doesn't know who he is. Bathes him and dedicates himself 24 hours to him. But in the meanwhile, his wife and his daughter want out of Iran. They want to go to Germany. And he's totally blind, not only to his wife's situation, not only to his daughter's situation. He's totally blind to the domestic worker who comes and goes and cleans around the house, completely ignorant of other goods in life. He has taken one maxim and forgotten about other maxims in life. And this is why this is a wonderful movie. He ends up not being the hero of the movie, because in the conflict of values, he ends up being a dogmatic, going with one value, not having any peripheral vision. We really have to have peripheral vision. When we are in the area of conflict of values, in our own lives, some of us become dogmatic, going with one maxim, forgetting about other maxims. We have to know that life is not simple. It is hard enough to choose good over evil. But sometimes there are many different kinds of good, and we can't ignore them by kind of focusing on only one value. And then the next one is Arjuna. Arjuna, based on Bhagavad-Gita, we really locked out a wonderful musician, Colin, who is part of the Silk Road ensemble, did compose the music, but we really locked out finding an excellent dancer, and she integrated a lot more theology into her dance than is in Bhagavad-Gita. So kind of she has a much more global expression of what is happening. And Arjuna is caught between two value systems. He's caught between his dharma, which is as a warrior, he has to kill. But then he looks at the enemy and he sees his cousins, he sees his martial arts teachers, he sees his benefactors, and he can't fight them. And here is when the Supreme Personality of Godhead comes down, Krishna, and instructs him in some kind of a pantheistic view of the world, as if we are all in God's dream, the way in our dreams we cast all the parts, we are the creator of the dream. We write the screenplay, we cast the parts, and we play every part. Basically, life is God's dream. And this is what Krishna is telling Arjuna, don't worry, you have to do your duty. As long as you are not attached to the results of your work, then you can achieve salvation. On the surface of it, this may seem like an admonition to war. But you all know that Mahatma Gandhi loved Bhagavad-Gita and always carried a copy of it with him. The prophet of nonviolence, somebody who directly inspired Martin Luther King in his nonviolent actions. But it's also very poignant and touches on my understanding and study and dedication to reforming religion, that the person who assassinated him also carried a copy of Bhagavad-Gita. Religion has this double-edged sword, and we have to constantly be vigilant. We have to constantly be involved in a non-ending process of reforming religion and making sure it does not turn on us. So you are in for a treat when you go to this, and her really, really powerful dance, Ms. Ramaswamy, and Aparna just a wonderful job of this. The next piece is Martin Luther King, and this is composed by Jason Moran, the great jazz musician, the contemporary American musician. And it is a couple of things about this, and I'm going to pass. First, in the background, you are going to see a historical footage of a breaking dam. It's a dam that breaks. It's a very grainy picture, and it stops occasionally, but it's really wonderfully fit for what Jason is doing. And pay attention to the quotation in the beginning that Martin Luther King says that I am increasingly, it's a Holt Street Baptist Church, I am increasingly, I'm paraphrasing, I'm increasingly concerned that the greatest enemy of the Negro's stride towards freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but it's the white liberal who considers peace without justice to be preferable to the presence of justice. So it is, I badly mangled that quotation, but pay attention to that quotation, and then I think it goes very well with the background and what's happening in the music. Another thing about Silk Road is it's really integrating different traditions of music. On the extreme right and extreme left, Wuman and Wu-Tang, both Chinese, use Chinese instruments. Wu-Tang over there, he's using a kind of something that I can only call like a version of Chinese harmonica, because you can play it by both blowing into it and taking air, exhaling and inhaling. You can infinitely play music on it without having to stop. And Jason considers this to be the sound of Martin Luther King. And at the end, he's going to do a bit about soul music. And this is really very touching that two Chinese musicians express the experience of this American hero. And it is really the wailing sound of this ancient spiritual instrument, sheng. He actually led a class at Santa Barbara with meditation using this instrument. And it's really, really an amazing experience to hear this music. Finally, we come to Siavosh, the Prince of Sorrows that is part of Shahnameh. In 2013, I translated a kind of abridged version of Shahnameh, and I've been very much involved with Shahnameh in the last 10 years. And this is the story of Siavosh. Now, it's very interesting that Siavosh makes exactly the opposite choice compared to Arjuna. Arjuna chooses to go to war and stick with his dharma as a warrior. Siavosh is a prince who is born, has some trouble in the palace, some palace intrigue, some improper sexual attention from his stepmother that he has to prove himself innocent of by an ordeal, fire ordeal. Here is where he kind of goes through fire. By the way, the person who does this animation in the background is a person who also animated the Shahnameh, Hamid Rahmanian, and also he was actually a director of this whole Shahnameh project. So Siavosh then goes to war, and he makes a pact with the enemy after defeating the enemy. Makes a pact with the enemy, and then part of this pact is against Turan. I was asking one of the presenters about this Turan, kingdom of Turan, which is in Shahnameh is a kind of a stereotypical enemy of the Iranians, and enemy king Afrasiab is defeated, and he offers war reparations, and it's all literally everything is in Shahnameh, and then he has to offer hostages, 100 of his relatives, so in the future he will not attack Iran again. The father of Siavosh is an evil person. He's an evil king. He is irascible. He is extremely unwise. He's the stereotype of a bad king. Many Iranians think Shahnameh is all about praising of Iranians and lambasting of Turanians. That is not true. I'm sure you all know that. In this story, actually, the malefactor, the worst person in the story is the father of Siavosh, who is the king of Iran. He denounces the peace treaty, calls his son a coward for making this treaty, and then in his anger, he orders him to kill all the hostages. Here is Siavosh, caught very much like Arjuna on the horns of this dilemma. Either he has to stick with his father, filial piety, and his king, same person, national duty, or he has to remain a human, killing 100 innocent people. What would you do? His friend and advisor, Bahram, advises him to go ahead and kill the hostages. After all, nobody can blame him. He's obeying an order. Not only is he obeying an order, he is also obeying his father. Who can fault you for obeying your father? What if 100 Turanians, enemy people, die? You really didn't want to kill them. Let them die. You are the crown prince. You are going to be the king one day. That is the right thing. I was talking to Kehan last night about an episode in the recent history of Islamic Republic. The heir apparent to Ayatollah Khomeini, Ayatollah Montazeri, who was going to be the next leader of Islamic Republic, objected to the executions, mass executions in the prisons. And because of his public denouncing of this, he was sacked and put on virtual house arrest for the rest of his life. And somebody asked him, why did you do this? If you had waited only 6 months, Khomeini would have died, you would be the leader of Iran, and this guy was a moderate, and Iran would not be in this mess. Wouldn't it be good to just be quiet about the executions? And you would be the next leader. You could do a lot of good. And his answer is really one of those heroic answers. His answer is, how do I know? How did I know I would live another 6 months? What if I remained silent and I died a week later? Right? Doing the right thing. Still, having said this, you know where my sympathies lie as an Iranian. Last night with Kehan, we were kind of admiring his stance. And Kehan, by the way, for some who might not know, is a master Kamanche player that is part of the Silk Road ensemble. Having said that, both of us said, oh, I wish he had just shut up. Iran would not be in such a mess. But as a hero, he really made the right decision. He chose for himself. For Siavosh and for Arjuna, they are making completely opposite choices, and both of them are heroes. There is no, the contradictions in life cannot be resolved. They are ineradicable. And that is why we have to take our stand. Each hero takes his or her stand. The dice of destiny are loaded. When I was 30 years old, I wrote this poem, and last night I just remembered this poem. The dice of destiny are loaded, but be impeccable and true while rolling them. Right? You know the dice are, you know the game is fixed somehow. Your only choice is to play it true. And that is a contradiction, I know, but like all mysteries, this is a contradiction that cannot be solved, and we should marinate in its grandeur. We can talk all we want about it as academic. Insofar as we are academics, we can and we should explore the problem. But once we come across the mystery, we might want to take a step back, and in collaboration with those who explore those realms, such as artists, we can marinate in its great mystery. I'm going to end by saying I have not said a single word that I had written here. It just, all of it went to waste. But I think it's just the presence, the wonderful presence in this beautiful room, and being in presence of so many wonderful scholars that I have encountered this morning. It really inspired me to talk extemporaneously. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker today, we only just met today, but when I was together with Cal Performances thinking about creating a program that would talk about these performances, I reached out to the classics department to see whether somebody could convey the story of Electra. And I met Duncan on the phone, really, we virtual met. And we had this wonderful conversation about some of the things that he, some of the pathways into the story of Electra. So Duncan is an assistant professor in the classics department. His interest is in the Roman period. He's interested in Roman cultural history, religion, in antiquity, intellectual history. And so I'm very, very pleased that he was willing to come and talk to you and talk to us about this very particular sonic heroine, as he refers to her. Please help me welcome Professor MacRae.
As someone who does the ancient Mediterranean, it's a real pleasure to get to talk to a group of people so interested in the Silk Road from the most extreme, perhaps, end of it. Though, as you will see, my talk today ends in Dresden, which is actually one of the places that destroyed the Silk Road, and then the place where European porcelain was invented, one of the things that broke down some of the connections which happened across Asia. Talking about a Greek mythical figure is not, of course, talking about a real person. There's no coherence that can be drawn from a life lived in a genuine historical moment in which we can get at a biography or even an essential character. Rather, with a mythical heroine like Electra, we must turn to the different versions of the story, to the often quite varied ways that she has appeared in art, literature, and music now over the 3 millennia of her existence. And yet, myths as traditional stories are not like other kinds of fiction. It is not just up to each artist, each visual artist, each writer, each composer, each video artist. Something persists, something over and above each artist's creation. And what persists are the defining elements of the myth, those that emerge through the tradition. As I want to suggest that for Electra, one of the things that persists is the way that she has been portrayed as a maker of sound, not just of speech, but of lament, of cries of horror, of shouts of rage. She is, as I am going to argue, a sonic heroine, and so I agree, totally fitting as a subject for the Silk Road Ensemble. Electra's story is the story of her family. My undergraduates get uncomfortable when I put up a mythological family tree. It's like, oh no, he's going to want us to know all the names. I'm going to try to walk us through this terrible family quite slowly. She was the daughter, she is here at the bottom, unfortunately. She was the daughter of the great king Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks in the Trojan War, and his wife Clytemnestra. But to understand Electra, we need to go one more generation back to her grandfather Atreus, king of Argos, and his brother Thyestes, a rival for his throne. As part of their struggle, Atreus committed a terrible crime by luring his brother and his brother's sons to Argos with a plan to kill the sons and to feed them to an unwitting Thyestes at a banquet. And Thyestes then would be impure from having eaten his own sons and destroyed. This plan went ahead, and it did secure the rule of Atreus at Argos. But one of the sons of Thyestes, named Aegisthus, survived to plot his revenge against the house of Atreus. In the next generation, the two sons of Atreus, Agamemnon and Menelaus, they were the ones who started and led the Trojan War when Menelaus' wife Helen ran off with her Trojan lover, and the two brothers gathered up the Greeks to get her back. Before, though, they could launch the 1,000 ships, they discovered that the gods were against them. The price for being allowed to cross to Troy? The sacrifice of one of Agamemnon's daughters, Iphigenia. Again, she's at the bottom here. Agamemnon and the other Greeks were to spend 10 long years at Troy, but Electra's mother, Clytemnestra, nursed a grudge against her husband for the murder of her daughter, Iphigenia. Her revenge found a firm ally in the son of Thyestes, Aegisthus. Their plot found its resolution at the moment of the return of the victorious Agamemnon from Troy. The scene is depicted on this remarkable classical Athenian vase, a crater for mixing wine to be put in the middle of the banquet room, and it's now in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Agamemnon, emerging from his bath and wearing a net bathrobe made for him by Clytemnestra, is surprised by Aegisthus and Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra runs in behind her husband, holding an axe to join in the death of the murder of her husband. The painter raises the intensity of the image by also including, on the other side, another figure, surely the daughter of Agamemnon, our heroine, Electra. And you can see it a bit easier on this rolled out version of the image. She stretches out one hand towards her father and the other is raised in terror. Significantly, I think, and I've never seen anyone notice this before, the artist has chosen to paint her with parted lips. That's what parted lips look like on Greek vases. Almost surely to indicate that she is letting out some kind of sound, some kind of words of horror. By contrast, her mother's lips are set firm in determination. The cycle of killing was not yet over. Electra's brother, Orestes, had been smuggled away from Argos to northern Greece, where, after many years, of course, he grew to adulthood and plotted his vengeance in turn. Things were harder for Electra, forced to live in Argos with the murderers of her father, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. The lovers kept her in the palace and forced her to stay unmarried, an almost unheard of situation in Greek society for a grown woman. And the ancient Greeks believed that the name Electra came from Electra, which meant unmarried. Right? So her unmarried status defines her on some level. In time, however, Orestes returns secretly to Argos, makes contact with Electra, and together they plot the deaths of their father's killers. The scene is depicted on the other side of the vase from Boston. The armed Orestes tricks his way into the palace to kill Aegisthus, and eventually his mother too. She stands behind him carrying the axe again. Electra also appears in the same position as before, but this time she urges on her brother to do the deed. In a striking way, the painter has made manifest the cycle of revenge. As the viewer moves around the vase, and such a mixing bowl, as I said, would be in the middle of a room, their gaze would follow the dreadful cycle of murders, the sheer repetitiveness of the killing of kin. The two outbursts of violence on the vase are also the two pivotal points in the story of Electra. Her myth hinges on her reaction to her father's death and the participation in the vengeance against her own mother. Centrally, these two killings provoke in Electra the vocal responses that make her, in my view, a sonic heroine. the sound of horror and lament for Agamemnon, and the angry cry for the blood of Clytemnestra. There is, though, a necessary silence to an image. If we are truly to hear Electra, we must turn to different media entirely. A few years after the vase in Boston was produced, another Athenian, the tragedian Sophocles, produced his own version of the story, the Electra. The plot focuses on the revenge against Clytemnestra. As the play opens, Orestes has secretly returned to Argos, sending ahead a messenger to falsely announce his death, which is a way for Orestes to eventually trick his way into the palace as the carrier of an urn supposedly full of his very own ashes. But in the meantime, and for the bulk of the playwright puts Electra on stage to lament her father and eventually her brother too, when his fake death is eventually proclaimed in the plot. She is introduced to the play with a sound, written in Greek as io, that signals her lament. Io, moi dustenos. Oh, I am wretched. The English barely conveys the effect. Io is a sob of grief, the deep exhalation that expresses the internal pain. Her lamentation is confirmed in her first true speaking part. We can listen to it, much better than having me read some translation, in the production for BBC Radio, which stars Kristen Scott Thomas as Electra. Okay, I realize it's a little quiet, and I promise that some of the later clips are louder. Lament, grief, anger for the death of her father. That's the lonely occupation of Electra in the Sophoclean play. In putting a grieving Electra on stage, Sophocles portrays an extreme version of a familiar role for women in ancient Greek culture, the role of ritual lament. Women who were kin to the dead faced a gendered expectation that they would loudly weep, tear at their hair and clothes, and sing dirges, a responsibility to make sound on behalf of the community for those who had died. In fact, this sonic expectation for grieving women, come forward if you're having problems hearing, do come forward. The sonic expectation for grieving women is found in many cultures, and we just heard about in part one. To take an example from Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan, women are expected to sit in a yurt and sing a lament called a koshok, which combines affective response and stereotyped expression. I'm going to hopefully play this, and it'll hopefully be audible. In Kyrgyzstan, as in classical Athens, these genuine Koshok tour can also be mediated and popularized. Their form is exploited for popular music videos or as means of characterization in movies. Instrumental versions of Koshok are played sometimes for hours on the radio at times of national tragedy in Kyrgyzstan. To return to Greece. The analogy with Koshok only illuminates one element of Sophocles' Electra. The sounds and words of her opening speech, if you heard them, do not just lament the father. She also voices her hatred for the mother and Aegisthus, his murderers. This anger comes to a head in the final part of the play, when Electra and Orestes, now united again, plot to surprise Clytemnestra, who is alone in the palace. Sophocles follows a slightly different plot to the one you already saw in the vase. Clytemnestra dies first, rather than Aegisthus first. They enter the palace, and Orestes brings in the urn that is supposedly full of his own ashes to his mother for burial. Electra comes back outside and is on stage, watching out, allegedly, in case Aegisthus returns. Hopefully we can hear this again in the BBC version with Kristen Scott Thomas. The first voices you will hear are the voices of the female chorus, and then you'll hear Electra herself. As you heard there, I hope. As you heard there, I hope at least the shout of Electra that hit her again, hit her harder. One of the most shocking lines, frankly, in Greek tragedy. A bloodthirsty Electra shouts repeatedly for her brother to kill her own mother. This is a vision of Electra the fanatic. The staging of the scene with murder off stage and Electra the focus intensifies the resonance of her cries. The play ends with the return of Aegisthus, and yet again Electra demands blood. They trap Aegisthus together, Electra demands his blood, and then is led off to die by Orestes, and the play closes. It is difficult to know how to take Electra, and Ahmed already made this point. Critics have often departed into one or two camps. A camp that hears best the laments of Electra, that sees the killing as a justified response to a murder and to years of grief. The other camp cannot hear that lament over the cries of rage, over her shocking demand that her mother feel pain. But above all, I think, our view of Sophocles' Electra may have to face the unsettling fact that the cries of lament and the howls of rage do not, after all, sound also different. Sophocles' play was not the end of the story for Electra, and in closing, I want to think about some of the continuity of telling Greek myths, first in European and now in global culture. Even now, long after the passing of ancient culture, Electra lives on in her third millennium and will live tonight in Berkeley. Perhaps the most famous of the modern versions of Electra is the one-act opera by Richard Strauss that premiered in Dresden in 1909. Strauss took the libretto of the opera from a play by his friend and contemporary Hugo von Hofmannsthal, a play that was largely, we can say, a German language version of Sophocles' tragedy. But opera, that perfect medium for testing the limits of speech as words and speech as music, proves to have been brilliantly suited to the myth of Electra. The opera opens with a striking triadic motif, played fortissimo by the orchestra. Then two maids speak up. One asks where Electra lurks. The other says, yes, it is the hour for the lamentation of her father. It is the hour when the walls echo with her cries. I'm going to try to hear this in a version for German television from 1981. The meaning of that opening motif, that opening set of notes, becomes clearer in Electra's first monologue, Strauss's version of that first speech that we sort of heard in Sophocles' Electra. Alone, all alone, she sings, since her father has gone to his tomb. So we hear the motif from the beginning of the opera again, this time sung by Electra as the name Agamemnon, the subject of her lament. Critics of Strauss reasonably call this the Agamemnon motif, and in fact Strauss seems to have called it himself, because it opens the opera. People have often then felt that the opera operates under the sign of Agamemnon. The presence of the dead king haunts the whole action of the work. But the musicologist Caroline Abate has proposed a different meaning for the motif. Taking a hint from the words of the maids, and from the fact that we first hear the motif articulated with words in the mouth of Electra herself, she argues that the motif does not strictly designate Agamemnon the man, rather it designates Electra's voice saying the name of that man. More specifically, the mourning lament that so strongly marks her existence. The opening notes of the opera, she writes, are Electra's unarticulated mourning cry, a cry which slashes across language and poetry, and like the clangor of a great gong, sets the action moving in its course. The leitmotif is also prominent, significantly, at the end of the opera. In a departure from Sophocles, Hofmannsthal and Strauss close the drama by having Electra dance her victory over the death of Clytemnestra and then suddenly collapse and die. apparently unable to continue to live. We hear again the motif, but this time repeatedly answered by E-flat minor chords, the chord that she dies to. As Electra dies, her lament fades away. Her sister cries out the name of Orestes, and the orchestra builds towards the resolution of the opera in a C major. But not even that was the last echo of Electra. As I know we will hear tonight from Palchi Sasaki and the performances of the Silk Road Ensemble, the sound of Electra, the sonic heroine, she still rings out. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all our three speakers for a wonderful panel.